Gain affects everything in live sound and you shouldn't wing it. Even if everything sounds great at first, you'll end up running into problems further down the line. In this video, you'll learn how to set gain correctly, what can go wrong if you don't set it correctly at the start, and answers to common complaints like, it's too loud when I turn my gain up. When we're done, you should feel comfortable setting gain in any situation, and you should feel confident defending why you set that gain there, should anyone question you. If we've not met yet, I'm Andrew and I spend all my time mixing live events. If you're just getting started mixing live events, then you should check out my free guide, 3 Steps to Perfect EQ. It's a PDF guide and I'll leave a link to that in the description below this video. But for now, let's dive into gain staging. So how do you go about setting the gain on a live mixer? The first thing that you need to know is that you should be using the gain meters. You should be soloing the channel that you're gaining and adjusting that gain until you get to the optimal point. The amount of gain that you add to a channel is not important at all. What is important is that you get the signal level up to the right spot. If you're using a microphone, especially a dynamic microphone, you might need quite a lot of gain to get that signal up to the right point. But if you're using a line level signal, something like a keyboard, a sampler, or even playback from a laptop, you might need just about 0 gain to get your level up to the optimal range. It's important to know that you don't need to add gain to something if it doesn't need gain. If you connect a sound source up to your mixer and you have plenty of signal level when you press that solo button and read the meters, then you don't need any more gain. So what is the level that you should aim for? Back in the days of analog mixers, they used to put a 0 on the meters, right? And the 0 was where you aimed for. On analog mixers, 0 was this optimal level, and if you went beyond that, you would go into the orange and then into the red on the meter, but it was no catastrophe. Like, if you pushed the gain beyond the 0 point, nothing terrible would happen. You had to drive it really hard to start hearing it, and any distortion was gradual. On digital mixers, we use something called decibels full scale, right? And basically, it means that 0 on the meters now is the end. There is no more gain to be had. All that lies beyond that point is distortion, and it sounds really, really bad. What we aim for is we usually aim for about -18 on the meters on digital mixers. And the reason we do this is to give us headroom in case that signal gets hotter, gets higher when it comes into the mixer, because we absolutely do not want it to get to 0 because that's clipping. On a digital mixer, we aim for -18 to sort of give the impression of the same amount of headroom that we used to have on analog mixers. Something else you need to know when you're setting gain for an input source is to leave yourself plenty of headroom. As I just said, we do not want to clip, so you need to make sure that you have enough left in the meters that you will not go to 0 should any loud noises happen. A real contender for this is dynamic instruments or vocals. Vocalists can have a dynamic range of between 20 and 30 decibels. That means that if you set a vocalist on a sound check to -18 on your digital mixer, they might suddenly scream during the performance and you will go right up to 0 and clip that sound. Although I said aim for -18, use your common sense and ask yourself, is it likely that this vocalist or instrument is going to get significantly higher? If you've enjoyed this video so far, I'd love it if you could subscribe to the channel. I've got loads of great tutorials and I'm always making more. Let's talk a little bit about some misconceptions of gain staging that I've heard out in the wild here and there. The biggest one of them that I've come across often from a lot of professionals actually is setting your faders to 0 and then just applying as much gain as you need to get the volume you need out your speakers. And I'm sure loads of people can get a great sound doing this, but if you ask me, it's backwards, right? You are letting the end of your signal chain dictate the start of your signal chain. And you should always start at the beginning with the end in mind in just about everything in life. Don't let the end dictate the start. Because if your system is overpowered and you put your fader to 0 at once and don't touch your gain and call it a day, you might end up with very, very low gain on your channel, and that can cause problems later on. Similarly, if your system is underpowered, you might end up gaining your channel way too much, and you can cause distortion and cause loads of other problems. If your fader is at 0 and you apply no gain because your main system is loud enough, what about your monitors? Are you sure your monitors are loud enough? This is how you end up with your monitor faders all the way at full, but the artist on stage still asking for more. Which leads us on to the second misconception, which is where in the signal chain to turn down if it's too loud. So you say that if you gain your signal up to minus 18 decibels, it's just too loud and your faders are all the way down at the bottom. The answer then is to address this at the end of the signal chain. This is why we have a master fader, so that we can drag it down and have all of the rest of our faders operating within this optimal gain range, right? If you don't know, the area around 0 on all the faders has the most resolution. That just means that if you move the fader a tiny little bit, you'll only change the volume a tiny little bit. If the faders are down really, really low, then a very small movement on the fader will correspond to a large change in volume. Basically, you have less fine control. Everything is quite coarse. I would recommend having your faders as close to 0 as possible, having your master fader as close to 0 as possible, and then using the matrix outputs on your mixer to send the signal to the speakers at the level that you want. I would recommend having your speakers turned up full and using those matrix outputs to control how much of the mixer goes to those speakers. That way you can mix a comfortable volume, but you also have the opportunity to get a little more juice out of your system if you need it. If you end up with twice as many people at the show than you expected, then you have the opportunity to add 10 decibels of gain to your system and know that nothing catastrophic is going to happen. There will be no distortion. The third misconception I come across, and this one blows my mind, is that gain opens up the sound somehow, that it changes the sound of the microphone that you've connected it to. It does not. When your microphone or any signal is plugged into that mixer, it is digitized and it becomes a digital signal. All the gain is doing is turning up that digital signal at the start. It is not altering it in any way whatsoever. There is no difference between fader gain or gain knob gain, except for where it is applied in the signal chain. What common problems might you run into if you use improper gain staging? The first one is that it can really make line checking a band a pain in the ass. If you have a show and you've sound checked your main headline act, and then you have some support bands come on, you switch the microphones around, and then you come back just before the headline act goes on, and you want to line check all the microphones. If you've used correct gain staging, then you can get someone to play the keys or talk into the microphone or play the guitar, and you can check that you are reaching minus 18 on the meters or thereabouts. If you have not gained up your microphones correctly, then you don't really have that resolution in the meters this time. You can't actually tell if the signal is suddenly lower than it should be, if someone's put a pad on the DI, if the microphone cable has broken on the vocal microphone. So it's really important to gain stage properly so that you can line check effectively. The second big problem that I've run into, I've made this mistake myself, is that if you don't gain stage properly at the start, you can affect all of your buses and all of the mixes going out from there. You end up with your faders turned all the way down for your monitor master output buses, and you're just mixing everything on like tiny little increments down at the bottom of the faders, which is not how it's intended to be done. Alternatively, if you're mixing to a stream, you end up not sending enough signal to the stream, or you've got all your master faders cranked to full on your outputs just to give the stream the level of output that they're looking for. If you set your gain properly at the start, all you need to do is send it out at 0 to your stream and you're happy. Similarly, it's a lot easier to do the fine control of the monitors using the resolution that you were intended to have on the faders. The third big problem that you run into if you don't gain stage correctly is that your effects and your dynamics won't work as intended. If you don't gain up your channel properly, you might go for your compressor and turn the threshold down and find that even with the threshold at its lowest, you can't get the compression that you need. The reverse is also true. If your gain is too high, you might find that even with your threshold all the way up, you're still compressing your vocal. And of course, if you distort your vocal, if you clip it, that's a form of compression, just a trashy sounding one. It also affects effects units. If you send a clipped vocal into an effects unit, you'll end up affecting the quality of your reverb. And if you send a clipped vocal into the effect, it also makes it more prone to feedback later on because all of the dynamics have been squashed out of it. So leave a comment down below and let me know how you gain up your signals. Do you use the meters or are you just turning it up and keeping your faders at 0? Justify it. Tell me why I'm wrong if you disagree with me. I'll leave a video up here with some other mixing techniques. Until next time, goodbye.